Sarah Mitchell thought it would be a peaceful evening jog through Pine Ridge Forest. The 28-year-old nurse had been using this trail for months, finding comfort in the quiet woods after long shifts at the hospital. The sun was setting, casting long shadows between the tall trees, but she knew the path well enough to navigate in the fading light. What she didn't know was that 3 men had been watching her routine for weeks. Derek Manning, a convicted felon with a history of violence, had spotted Sarah during one of her runs. He convinced his 2 friends, Jake and Tommy, that they could have some fun with the pretty runner who always jogged alone. The men had positioned themselves strategically along the trail. Derek waited near the old wooden bridge while Jake hid behind the large oak tree about a quarter-mile ahead. Tommy was supposed to cut off her escape route back toward the parking area. They had done this before in other towns, always choosing isolated victims who wouldn't be missed until it was too late. Sarah noticed something was wrong when she heard branches snapping in the woods around her. At first, she thought it might be deer or other wildlife, but the sound seemed too deliberate, too coordinated. Her heart rate increased, not from the exercise, but from a growing sense of unease that crept up her spine like cold fingers. When she reached the old bridge, Derek stepped out from behind a tree. He was a large man with tattoos covering his arms and a cruel smile that made Sarah's blood run cold. She immediately turned to run back the way she came, but Jake emerged from his hiding spot, blocking her path. Both men were grinning, enjoying the fear they saw in her eyes. Sarah's mind raced through her options. She could try to run into the dense woods, but she might get lost in the darkness. She could scream, but who would hear her this deep in the forest? Her phone had no signal in this part of the trail. Panic began to set in as she realized how perfectly they had trapped her. Derek spoke first, his voice low and threatening. He told her not to make this difficult, that they just wanted to have a little conversation. But Sarah could see the evil intentions in their eyes. She had seen enough victims come through the hospital emergency room to know what these men really wanted. Tommy appeared from the direction of the parking area, completing their circle. He was younger than the other 2, but had the same predatory look. Sarah was now completely surrounded with nowhere to run. The men began closing in, taking their time, savoring her terror like predators playing with their prey. Sarah tried to reason with them, offering her purse, her jewelry, anything of value she had with her. But Derek just laughed and shook his head. He told her they weren't interested in her money. The way he looked at her made it clear what they really wanted, and Sarah felt sick to her stomach. As the men got closer, Sarah made a desperate decision. She would not go down without a fight. She had taken some self-defense classes at the gym, though she never imagined she would need to use them. She positioned herself with her back to a large tree, trying to keep all 3 men in her line of sight. Derek lunged first, confident that a small woman would be easy to overpower. Sarah managed to dodge and deliver a knee strike that caught him off guard, but Jake quickly grabbed her from behind. She struggled fiercely, managing to break free momentarily, but Tommy caught her arm and twisted it painfully behind her back. The forest seemed to close in around them as Sarah's screams echoed through the trees. But in this remote part of the woods, miles from the nearest house, her cries seemed swallowed by the darkness. The men laughed as they overpowered her, dragging her toward a small clearing where they planned to carry out their assault. Just when Sarah thought all hope was lost, she heard the sound of footsteps approaching through the underbrush. Someone else was in the woods. Derek cursed and told the others to keep her quiet while he went to see who was coming. Sarah's heart leaped with hope, but she also feared for whoever was approaching, knowing they would be walking into a dangerous situation with 3 violent criminals. The footsteps grew closer, accompanied by the sound of someone moving confidently through the forest. Derek gripped a large hunting knife he had pulled from his belt, ready to eliminate this unexpected threat to their plans. Sarah tried to call out a warning, but Jake clamped his dirty hand over her mouth, his grip tightening as the stranger approached their location. Marcus Thompson had come to these woods for a different reason entirely. The 34-year-old single father was searching for his 8-year-old daughter Emma's lost backpack. She had dropped it somewhere along the trail during their weekend camping trip, and it contained her favorite stuffed animal and some important school papers. Emma had been heartbroken, so Marcus promised he would find it before dark. As a former Navy SEAL who had served 3 tours in Afghanistan, Marcus moved through the forest with practiced stealth. His trained ears picked up sounds that most civilians would miss. When he heard Sarah's muffled screams, Every instinct he had developed during years of combat operations kicked into high gear. Something was very wrong ahead of him. Marcus immediately shifted into tactical mode. He moved carefully toward the sounds, using trees and shadows for cover. His mind automatically assessed the situation as he got closer. Multiple male voices, one female in distress, isolated location with no backup available. He had handled worse odds in hostile territory, but he knew civilians were involved, which made everything more complicated. Through the trees, Marcus could see the three men surrounding Sarah. His military training allowed him to quickly evaluate the threat level. Derek appeared to be the leader, armed with a knife. Jake was restraining the victim while Tommy acted as a lookout. Marcus recognized the coordinated nature of their actions and realized these weren't random criminals but experienced predators. Marcus had two options: retreat and call for help, knowing the victim would likely be dead before authorities arrived, or engage immediately to save her life. For a Navy SEAL, there was really no choice at all. He had sworn an oath to protect the innocent, and that oath didn't end when he left the military. Derek was moving toward Marcus's position, knife ready, when Marcus decided to act. Using techniques learned in close quarters combat training, Marcus emerged from behind a tree and struck with precision. His first move was a silent takedown that left Derek unconscious before the man could make a sound or use his weapon. Jake heard Derek's body hit the ground and spun around, releasing his grip on Sarah. This was the moment she had been waiting for. As soon as Jake's attention was diverted, Sarah broke free and ran toward the sound of her rescuer. But Tommy was faster, grabbing her ankle and sending her tumbling to the forest floor. Marcus assessed the new tactical situation instantly. 2 targets remaining, one with a hostage at ground level approximately 15 meters apart. He had to neutralize Tommy first to secure the victim, then deal with Jake before he could retrieve Derek's knife or produce a weapon of his own. Moving with the fluid precision that had made him one of the Navy's elite warriors, Marcus closed the distance to Tommy in seconds. The criminal had no time to react before Marcus delivered a combination of strikes that sent him sprawling unconscious next to Derek. Sarah scrambled away from both men, her heart pounding as she realized someone had actually come to save her. Jake, seeing his 2 companions defeated so quickly, tried to run, but Marcus was not about to let him escape to potentially harm other innocent people. Years of training in pursuit and capture techniques made short work of Jake's desperate flight through the woods. Within minutes, Marcus had subdued all 3 attackers without any of them landing a single blow. Sarah stood in the clearing, trembling from shock and adrenaline. She could barely comprehend what had just happened. One moment she was certain she was going to be assaulted or killed, and the next moment all 3 of her attackers were lying unconscious on the ground. The man who had saved her stood calmly nearby, not even breathing heavily despite the intense physical confrontation. Marcus approached Sarah slowly, keeping his hands visible and speaking in a calm, reassuring voice. He introduced himself and explained that he was former military, trying to help her understand that she was now safe. Sarah collapsed to her knees, overwhelmed by relief and delayed shock from her terrifying ordeal. While Sarah tried to compose herself, Marcus efficiently secured the 3 criminals using zip ties he always carried in his hiking pack. His military experience had taught him to be prepared for any situation. He also retrieved Derek's knife and checked each man for additional weapons, finding another blade and what appeared to be rope that had clearly been intended for restraining their victim. Marcus helped Sarah to her feet and guided her away from the unconscious men. He needed to get her to safety and contact law enforcement, but first he wanted to make sure she wasn't seriously injured. He could see cuts and bruises on her arms where the men had grabbed her, but thankfully they hadn't had time to cause more serious harm. Sarah finally found her voice and asked Marcus who he was and how he had found her. When he explained about searching for his daughter's backpack, Sarah began to cry, realizing how fortunate the timing had been. If Emma hadn't lost her backpack, if Marcus hadn't promised to find it, if he had come looking even 10 minutes later, the outcome would have been vastly different. Marcus contacted emergency services using his satellite phone, providing precise GPS coordinates and a detailed report of the situation. He knew the importance of proper documentation for the legal proceedings that would follow. While they waited for law enforcement to arrive, Marcus stayed alert, keeping watch over the 3 criminals and ensuring Sarah felt protected. The police arrived within 40 minutes, followed closely by paramedics and crime scene investigators. Detective Rachel Morgan was the first to interview Sarah, who was still shaky but determined to tell her story. Marcus waited patiently nearby, having already provided a preliminary report to the responding officers. As the investigation unfolded, disturbing details began to emerge about Sarah's 3 attackers. Derek Manning was wanted in 2 other states for similar crimes. His pattern was always the same: target isolated women, work with accomplices to trap them, then disappear before law enforcement could connect the crimes. Jake and Tommy had been traveling with Derek for months, and their cell phones contained photos and videos suggesting they had committed other assaults that had never been reported. Detective Morgan was particularly interested in Marcus's account of the rescue. As a 20-year veteran of law enforcement, she had rarely seen such a clean resolution to what could have been a brutal crime. Marcus's military background explained his tactical approach, but she was impressed by how he had neutralized 3 dangerous criminals without causing permanent injury to any of them. Sarah was transported to the hospital for examination and treatment of her injuries. The cuts on her arms required stitches, and she had bruising on her ribs where Jake had grabbed her. But physically, she was going to recover completely. The emotional trauma would take much longer to heal, something the hospital counselors explained to her during her evaluation. Marcus accompanied Sarah to the hospital, partly because his statement was needed for the police report, but also because he could see she needed someone to stay with her. His own daughter Emma was with his sister for the evening, so he had no immediate responsibilities at home. Something about Sarah's courage during her ordeal reminded him of his late wife, who had also been a nurse and had possessed the same inner strength. At the hospital, Sarah learned more about the man who had saved her life. Marcus had joined the Navy at 18 and became a SEAL after years of grueling training. He had served his country with distinction, earning multiple commendations for valor under fire. After his wife died in a car accident 3 years earlier, he had left active duty to focus on raising Emma as a single parent. Marcus now worked as a security consultant for government contractors, a job that allowed him to use his specialized skills while maintaining a stable home life for his daughter. He had bought a house near Pine Ridge specifically because of the peaceful environment and good schools. The irony that such violence had occurred in the woods he considered safe was not lost on him. While they waited for Sarah's test results, she and Marcus talked about their lives. Sarah had moved to Pine Ridge 6 months earlier to take a position at the regional medical center. She was running on the trail regularly as part of training for a charity marathon, something she now wondered if she would ever feel safe doing again. Marcus understood her fears better than most people could. He had seen many soldiers struggle with trauma after combat experiences. He gently suggested that Sarah consider counseling and offered to help her find resources for crime victims. His compassionate approach surprised Sarah, who had expected a tough military man to be less understanding about emotional healing. The hospital released Sarah later that evening with instructions to rest and return if she experienced any complications. She had no family in the area yet, and her closest friends lived several hours away. Marcus offered to drive her home and make sure her house was secure before leaving her alone. Sarah gratefully accepted, still not comfortable with the idea of being by herself so soon after the attack. At Sarah's house, Marcus did a complete security check, examining doors, windows, and sight lines around the property. He suggested some improvements to her home security system and offered to help implement them. Sarah was touched by his continued concern for her safety, especially since they had been complete strangers just hours earlier. Before Marcus left that night, Sarah asked him why he had risked his life to save someone he didn't even know. His answer was simple but profound. He had a daughter, and he hoped that if Emma was ever in danger, someone would step forward to protect her. He also believed that good people had an obligation to stand up against evil when they encountered it. Sarah invited Marcus to stay for coffee, not ready to be alone with her thoughts about the evening's events. They talked until nearly midnight, sharing stories about their work, their families, and their hopes for the future. Despite the traumatic circumstances that had brought them together, Sarah felt a connection with Marcus that she hadn't experienced with anyone since moving to Pine Ridge. When Marcus finally prepared to leave, he gave Sarah his phone number and made her promise to call if she felt unsafe or needed anything at all. He also mentioned that Emma would love to meet the brave nurse who worked at the hospital where they had received such good care when Emma had broken her arm the previous year. As Marcus drove home through the quiet streets of Pine Ridge. He reflected on the evening's events. His SEAL training had prepared him for combat situations, but he had never expected to use those skills to save someone in his own peaceful hometown. He felt grateful that he had been in the right place at the right time, but also concerned about what might have happened to Sarah if circumstances had been different. Detective Morgan called both Marcus and Sarah the next morning with an update on the investigation. All three men had been charged with attempted kidnapping, assault, and conspiracy. Derek's fingerprints had been matched to evidence from two other unsolved cases in neighboring states. The district attorney's office was confident they had enough evidence for conviction on multiple charges that would put all three men away for many years. Sarah took 3 weeks off from work to recover from her ordeal, but staying home alone only made her anxiety worse. Every sound outside made her jump, and she found herself checking locks multiple times throughout the day. Sleep came in short, troubled intervals filled with nightmares about being chased through dark woods. Her doctor prescribed medication to help with the anxiety, but Sarah knew she needed more than pills to heal from this trauma. Marcus called to check on her every few days, always at appropriate times and never staying on the phone too long. His military discipline showed in how he respected her boundaries, while still making sure she was okay. During one of these calls, Sarah broke down crying, admitting that she was scared to leave her house and didn't know how to get her life back to normal. Without hesitation, Marcus offered to help Sarah with practical steps toward feeling safe again. He suggested they start with small outings during daylight hours to places where she felt comfortable. The first trip was just to the grocery store, with Marcus accompanying her but staying far enough away that she didn't feel dependent on his protection. The simple act of buying food and interacting with cashiers was a victory worth celebrating. Emma Thompson finally met Sarah during their second outing to the local park. The 8-year-old was exactly as Marcus had described, bright, curious, and full of energy. Emma immediately took to Sarah, asking about her job as a nurse and sharing stories about school and her friends. Sarah found Emma's innocent chatter remarkably healing, providing a distraction from her own dark thoughts. The three of them began meeting regularly for casual activities like visiting the farmer's market or having lunch at family-friendly restaurants. Emma's presence made everything feel normal and safe, while Marcus provided quiet strength that helped Sarah gradually rebuild her confidence. These outings were never labeled as dates, but Sarah began looking forward to them more than anything else in her week. Marcus shared more about his own struggles with adjusting to civilian life after military service. He talked about the challenge of being both father and mother to Emma, especially during her difficult questions about why her mom had died. His openness about his own vulnerabilities helped Sarah feel less broken and more understood than any of the counseling sessions she had attended. One evening, Sarah finally felt ready to drive somewhere alone for the first time since the attack. She chose the bookstore downtown, a public place with good lighting and plenty of people around. The trip went well until she was walking back to her car in the parking lot. A man approached her asking for directions, and Sarah immediately panicked, her heart racing as all the fear came flooding back. The man was completely harmless, just a tourist looking for the local hotel, but Sarah couldn't stop shaking even after she safely reached her car. She sat in the parking lot for 20 minutes trying to calm down enough to drive home. Finally, she called Marcus, embarrassed but desperate for someone who would understand what she was experiencing. Marcus arrived within 15 minutes and sat with Sarah in her car until she felt ready to drive. He didn't try to minimize her reaction or rush her recovery process. Instead, he shared a story about his own panic attack during his first civilian job interview, helping Sarah understand that healing from trauma was not a linear process and that setbacks were normal and temporary. The incident at the bookstore became a turning point in Sarah's recovery. Instead of retreating back into isolation, she decided to face her fears more directly. She asked Marcus to help her learn basic self-defense techniques, not because she wanted to become a fighter, but because she needed to feel capable of protecting herself if she ever faced danger again. Marcus was initially reluctant to teach Sarah combat techniques, worried that focusing too much on violence might slow her emotional healing, but he recognized that feeling empowered was important for her recovery. So he agreed to teach her simple defensive moves that could help her escape from dangerous situations rather than engage in prolonged fights. They practiced in Marcus's backyard while Emma was at school, starting with basic awareness techniques and gradually progressing to physical defensive moves. Sarah was surprised to discover that she was naturally athletic and picked up the techniques quickly. More importantly, each session left her feeling stronger and more confident in her ability to handle unexpected situations. The self-defense training also deepened the bond between Sarah and Marcus. He was impressed by her determination to overcome her fears, while she appreciated his patient teaching style and genuine concern for her well-being. They began spending time together even when they weren't training, often with Emma joining them for dinner or movie nights at Marcus's house. Detective Morgan contacted Sarah with news that Derek Manning had agreed to a plea bargain in exchange for providing information about other crimes he had committed with different accomplices in other states. His cooperation was helping law enforcement solve several cold cases involving attacks on women in remote locations. Sarah felt satisfaction knowing that her case was helping bring justice for other victims. The plea bargain meant Sarah would not have to testify at a trial, which was a relief since she had been dreading having to face her attackers again in court. Jake and Tommy also accepted plea deals that would result in significant prison sentences. Detective Morgan assured Sarah that all three men would be locked up for many years, with Derek likely never being released due to his extensive criminal history. As autumn arrived in Pine Ridge, Sarah realized she had not thought about the attack for several days in a row. This was the first time since the incident that her trauma hadn't dominated her thoughts every single day. She was sleeping better, laughing more often, and beginning to make plans for the future again. The healing process was far from complete, but she finally believed she would eventually feel like herself again. Sarah's relationship with Marcus had evolved into something neither of them had expected when they first met in those dark woods. What began as a rescue had grown into genuine friendship, mutual respect, and the beginnings of something deeper that neither was quite ready to name yet, but both were beginning to hope might be possible. Winter came early to Pine Ridge that year, and with it came unexpected challenges that tested the growing relationship between Sarah, Marcus, and Emma. The first snowfall reminded Sarah that she still hadn't returned to running, something that had been such an important part of her life before the attack. The idea of exercising alone in any outdoor location still filled her with anxiety, but she missed the physical and mental benefits of her regular training. Marcus suggested they start with indoor exercise at the local gym, where Sarah could rebuild her fitness in a controlled environment surrounded by other people. He offered to work out with her, not as a bodyguard but as a training partner who understood the importance of physical fitness for mental health. Sarah appreciated his approach, which gave her support without making her feel weak or dependent. Their gym sessions became a regular part of their routine, with Emma sometimes joining them for the swimming pool sessions on weekends. Emma was a natural athlete like her father, and she loved teaching Sarah silly pool games that had all three of them laughing until their sides hurt. These moments of pure joy were healing for Sarah in ways that formal therapy sessions could never match. The gym routine led to Sarah meeting other people in Pine Ridge for the first time since moving there. She connected with other women who had noticed her consistency and dedication to her recovery. Some of them were also single, others were mothers like Emma, and gradually Sarah began building a social network beyond her relationship with Marcus and his daughter. Marcus found himself in an unexpected situation as he watched Sarah's confidence returning. He had initially thought of himself as just helping a crime victim recover, but somewhere along the way his feelings had deepened into something much more personal. He was falling in love with Sarah, but he worried about the complexity of their situation and whether his feelings were appropriate given how they had met. Emma, with the straightforward wisdom that only children possess, had no such complications about her feelings. She adored Sarah and made no secret of hoping she would become a permanent part of their family. Emma began asking Sarah to help with homework, include her in bedtime stories, and attend school events alongside Marcus. To Emma, Sarah already felt like the mother she barely remembered losing. The first real test of their relationship came when Sarah was offered a promotion at the hospital that would require her to move to the main facility in the state capital, about 3 hours away from Pine Ridge. The position was exactly what she had been working toward in her career, with better pay, more responsibility, and opportunities for advancement that didn't exist in their small town. Sarah was torn between her professional ambitions and the life she was building in Pine Ridge. The promotion would mean leaving behind the safety and support system she had created with Marcus and Emma, but it also represented the chance to fully reclaim her independence and career goals. She spent weeks agonizing over the decision, knowing that either choice would involve significant sacrifices. Marcus struggled with his own response to Sarah's career opportunity. His military training had taught him to prioritize mission success over personal desires, and he recognized that this job could be important for Sarah's long-term happiness and professional fulfillment. But the thought of losing her just as their relationship was developing was more painful than he had expected. Emma's reaction was immediate and heartbreaking. She begged Sarah not to leave, promising to be better behaved and help more around the house if Sarah would just stay in Pine Ridge. Emma had lost her mother already and couldn't understand why Sarah would choose to leave when they had become such a happy family together. Her tears broke both Sarah's and Marcus's hearts. During this difficult period, Sarah received a call from Detective Morgan with disturbing news. Derek Manning had somehow managed to contact other criminals from prison, and there were indications that he was trying to arrange retaliation against Sarah for her cooperation with law enforcement. While the threats weren't specific enough to warrant police protection, Detective Morgan advised Sarah to be extra cautious about her safety. The news of potential threats from Derek changed everything about Sarah's decision regarding the job promotion. Marcus immediately shifted into protective mode, increasing security around Sarah's house and insisting that she not travel anywhere alone. The progress Sarah had made in overcoming her fears seemed to evaporate as she realized that Derek could continue to threaten her safety, even from behind bars. Marcus made a decision that surprised everyone, including himself. He approached his former commanding officer about opportunities for government contract work that could be done remotely or from different locations. His specialized skills were in high demand, and he discovered that he could actually increase his income while gaining the flexibility to relocate if necessary. When Marcus presented this option to Sarah, she was overwhelmed by his willingness to uproot his and Emma's life for her sake. Emma was equally surprised but excited about the possibility of a new adventure, especially if it meant Sarah would stay with them. The idea of starting fresh in a new city together began to feel less like running away and more like moving forward as a family. Sarah accepted the promotion but negotiated a delayed start date that would give Marcus time to arrange his work situation and Emma time to finish the school semester. They spent the remaining months in Pine Ridge preparing for their move and solidifying their relationship. What had begun as a rescue in the woods was transforming into a genuine partnership built on trust, shared values, and deep affection. The threats from Derek never materialized into actual danger, but they had served an important purpose in clarifying what really mattered to all three of them. Sarah realized that her career ambitions were important, but not more important than the love and security she had found with Marcus and Emma. Marcus understood that protecting the people he cared about sometimes meant taking risks and making changes, rather than maintaining the status quo. As winter turned to spring in Pine Ridge, the three of them began making concrete plans for their future together. Sarah would take her new job, Marcus would establish his consulting business in the new city, and Emma would start fresh at a new school, where she could tell everyone about her brave nurse who had become part of their family. The move to the state capital went more smoothly than any of them had dared to hope. Sarah's new position at Regional Medical Center challenged her in exactly the ways she had wanted, utilizing her skills in trauma nursing while giving her opportunities to train other medical professionals. Her experience as a crime victim had given her unique insights into patient care that made her particularly effective with people who had survived violent attacks. Marcus's consulting business thrived in the larger city, where government contractors needed his specialized security expertise for projects ranging from protecting diplomatic facilities to training law enforcement agencies in counterterrorism techniques. The work was meaningful and well paid, allowing him to provide financial security for his growing family while maintaining the flexible schedule that let him be present for Emma and Sarah. Emma adapted to her new school with the resilience that had helped her cope with her mother's death. She made friends quickly and excelled in her studies, often telling classmates about her dad, the Navy SEAL, and her new mom, the nurse who saved people's lives. To Emma, Sarah had become her mother in every way that mattered, and she loved introducing her to teachers and friends as such. The three of them settled into a comfortable routine in their new home, a modest house in a safe neighborhood with good schools and parks nearby. Sarah had her own room initially, but it became clear that she and Marcus were ready to take their relationship to the next level. They had moved slowly and carefully, always considering Emma's feelings and ensuring that their romantic relationship enhanced rather than complicated their family dynamic. 1 year after the attack in Pine Ridge Woods, Sarah was finally ready to return to outdoor running, but instead of running alone, she joined a local group that met for morning runs in the city's main park. The group included other women who had experienced various life challenges and found strength through running together. Sarah discovered that helping others overcome their fears was an important part of her own continued healing. Marcus proposed to Sarah on the anniversary of the day they met, returning to Pine Ridge for a special occasion that transformed their traumatic memory into something beautiful. They hiked the same trail where Sarah had been attacked, but this time they were accompanied by Emma, Detective Morgan, and several friends who had become part of their extended family. At the spot where Marcus had first seen Sarah in danger, he asked her to marry him. Sarah's answer was immediate and joyful. She had found not just safety and love with Marcus, but also a sense of purpose that came from turning their tragic beginning into something that could inspire hope in others. Emma cheered and hugged them both, officially becoming Sarah's daughter in every way except legally, something they planned to remedy through adoption proceedings after the wedding. The wedding took place 6 months later in a small ceremony attended by family, friends, and several of the crime victims Sarah had helped treat at the hospital. Detective Morgan served as Sarah's matron of honor, having become a close friend during the investigation and recovery process. Emma was the flower girl, proudly walking down the aisle ahead of Sarah and Marcus as they began their new life together as a legal family. Marcus's fellow veterans attended the ceremony, impressed by how their tough Navy SEAL teammate had found happiness after losing his first wife. Sarah's colleagues from both hospitals celebrated with them, noting how much joy Sarah had brought to their workplace and how her positive attitude had influenced patient care throughout their departments. After the wedding, Sarah and Marcus began speaking at conferences and support groups about trauma recovery and the importance of community support for crime victims. Their story resonated with audiences because it demonstrated that healing was possible, even after the most frightening experiences, and that sometimes the worst moments in life could lead to unexpected blessings. Emma thrived as Sarah officially became her stepmother and began adoption proceedings to make their family bond legally permanent. Emma's grades improved, her confidence grew, and she developed a strong interest in both medicine and military service, inspired by both of her parents' dedication to helping others. She often said she wanted to be a military doctor when she grew up, combining both parents' careers. Derek Manning died in prison 2 years after his conviction, ending any remaining threats to Sarah's safety. The news brought closure to that chapter of their lives, allowing Sarah to finally stop looking over her shoulder and fully embrace the security she had found with her new family. Jake and Tommy remained incarcerated, and Sarah occasionally received updates about other victims who had found the courage to come forward thanks to her case. 5 years after that terrifying night in Pine Ridge Woods, Sarah and Marcus were blessed with a son they named David. Giving Emma the little brother she had been hoping for, Emma took her role as big sister seriously, teaching David about courage, kindness, and the importance of protecting people who needed help. Sarah returned to running competitively, participating in marathons to raise money for crime victim support organizations. Marcus often ran beside her during training, and Emma rode her bicycle alongside them during their longer runs through the city parks. What had once been a solitary activity that made Sarah vulnerable had become a family tradition that brought them closer together. Their story became known throughout their community as an example of how tragedy could be transformed into triumph through courage, compassion, and the willingness to help others. Sarah never forgot that her life had been saved by a stranger who chose to risk his own safety for someone he didn't even know. And she made sure to teach both Emma and David that they had the same obligation to stand up for people who needed protection. Looking back on their journey from that dark night in the woods to their happy family life, Sarah and Marcus often marveled at how perfectly their paths had intersected at exactly the right moment. What had begun as the worst night of Sarah's life had ultimately led to the greatest blessings she had ever received: a husband who would always protect her, a daughter who filled their home with laughter, and a son who represented their bright future together. Their love story proved that even in the darkest moments, heroes could emerge from unexpected places, and that sometimes the people who save us end up being the ones we were meant to find all along.